everybody. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. Today, I want to talk about what a day in the life of a whitetail deer hunter looks like. And it could look different for different people depending on where you live and what style of hunting you're doing. But I want to give a broad overview for those of you who have never been deer hunting before, or maybe you are deer hunting on your own and you're just questioning if you're doing it right. And maybe I should put right in air quotes because, again, there's so many different ways to hunt. But I remember being a new hunter, and the first times I went out on my own, it was kind of like a surreal sort of experience where I go out, I look for animals, I'm carrying a gun, which I don't normally do. And I was just always questioning, am I doing this right? Like, am I actually hunting? And then it was only when I started to have some little successes that I started to feel like, okay, yeah, I'm hunting. Like, this is it. Obviously, what I'm doing is working. Now, even after I had some more successful experiences, I still had those questions like, is there a way that I could be doing this better? What do I not know? And are there people who have more experience than me that could show me, a better way to approach hunting? And so today, if you're a new hunter, you may have some of these questions like, am I doing this right? Like, what is it supposed to feel like in a way? And I'm hoping that this episode will kind of give you an overview of what deer hunting might look like and give you some confidence for when you hit the field this season. So I'm going to go all the way through it from start to finish, and we'll talk about, what a day looks like when you don't kill an animal, and then what a day looks like when you do kill an animal, and try to cover all our bases, and hopefully it will be helpful for you, and maybe you'll realize, yeah, I am doing this, in an effective way. Or maybe you'll realize, oh, there's something else that I'd like to implement. Before we get into it, if you enjoy this podcast, if you've learned something new, please take a moment to support the podcast. You obviously support the podcast by listening, and I truly appreciate that. But if you could take a moment and hit the follow button or share an episode with a friend or leave a 5-star review, that will help the podcast grow and reach more listeners and help more people get outside and into hunting. So once again, thank you so much for supporting the podcast. And let's get into our topic for today. I'm going to title this episode something like Deer Hunting, a Day in the Life. But in reality, my day of deer hunting starts well before the actual day of. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is go scouting. And this may be boots on the ground scouting, where I go out to an area and hike around and just get a feel for the landscape, figure out where the animals are, find out where they might be bedding and where they might be feeding. If I don't have time to do that, I might be using an app like Onyx Hunt to look at the terrain and aerial imagery and figure out some of those things as well. And both can be effective, but it's just the idea that you are familiarizing yourself with the area and actually breaking it down and thinking about where the animals are going to be and where they're going to travel and where they're going to feed and all those different elements. Because you could go out to an area and it could be 1,000 acres, right? And there's not going to be deer evenly dispersed throughout that area. They are going to stick to certain spots and certain travel routes because they're creatures of habit and they need things like water and food and shelter. And so if you can do anything to start to narrow that down, you are going to give yourself an advantage. Scouting can be done way before the season. It can be done a week ahead of the season. Depending on the time frame, you may look for different things, but it's something you can do well in advance. when I'm actually going to go out hunting, I'm going to make a plan. And usually I'm making some sort of plan the day before. If it's a big long hunt, I might make a more detailed plan further out. But for a day hunt, I'm likely going to make my plan the day before. And when I'm making my plan, I'm just thinking, okay, where am I going to go? Where am I going to spend time? Do I have a place that I can access the spot that I want to hunt without bumping the animals? Where am I going to park? If I get an animal, how am I going to get it out? Is that going to be multiple trips with a backpack? Am I going to drag it? And then what do I do with the meat? Do I need a cooler? Am I going to bring it to a processor? All those little details. And it's a good idea to just think through it and have some sort of plan. And I found that when I'm hunting, my hunt rarely goes to plan, but at least you have an idea. And some of those details you can figure out beforehand and not have to worry about them or make all those decisions on the fly. So just make a plan. It can be simple, it can be complicated, but think through your hunt and have an idea of what you want to do. On the day of, I am going to wake up very early. How early you wake up kind of depends on the hunting style that you are planning to use. But for deer and for all cervids, they are most active in the early mornings and the late evenings. They're crepuscular, which means active during those low light hours. And so if you want a chance to kill a deer on its feet, you should be out in the very early mornings and the very late evenings. And we like those times of day because deer are easier to kill when they're moving. Imagine a deer out in a woodlot and it's just bedded down, maybe in some brush. Your chances of finding that deer are very, very low because it's not moving around. It could be well camouflaged. Like you'd practically have to trip over it to find it. So that's why we go out in these early timeframes or these very late timeframes of the day. That doesn't mean you can't kill a deer throughout the day. It just means those are the most likely times that they will be on their feet. So I'm going to wake up very early. Usually I'm going to prep all my stuff the night before. I will put my food in the fridge. I might even get my clothes out so I can leave my bedroom and not bother my wife, and have all that prepped and ready to go. And then I can get up, grab everything, put it in my car, and be out the door in maybe half an hour from waking up. And then I assume I'll have some sort of a drive. Maybe it's half an hour, maybe it's 2 hours, just depending on where you live. And you're trying to get out into the woods well before daylight. And for an ambush style hunt, which is very popular for whitetail deer hunters, you may want to be in your stand or in the place where you're sitting an hour before daylight, which means you kind of have to work backwards from that time. So when is first light? How long does it take to drive there? How long is it going to take me to walk in? And not everybody's going to be out there an hour before daylight. Maybe you're out there half an hour before daylight. But the idea is that you can be out there, settled in, and waiting quietly once those animals start to move. Now, if you're doing sort of a spot and stalk hunt, it may not be as important that you're out there an hour before daylight, but you still want to be there as soon as first light hits, because those next 2 hours in that very early morning light are going to be some of your best opportunities to actually spot some deer. So once you've woken up and you've driven, you've got to your area, right? And you've parked your car, you're going to sneak into your area. Let's say you're ambush hunting, again, because it's a very popular and effective way to hunt whitetail deer. So you've got to your parking area. Be careful with that truck door, because if you slam that, you could alert deer everywhere. And then hopefully you can find a route that you can get into the place you want to hunt without the deer hearing or smelling you. So this is really important to think about because if you bump the deer in the dark, your hunt's pretty much over before it began, right? So in the evenings, deer are generally going to be feeding and they may bed in fields or near other food sources. And in those early mornings before light, they may still be bedded there or they may be getting up on their feet. Well, it would be a mistake to walk through a field where the deer are feeding or bedded at 4 a.m., right? Because they're going to smell you. And it might be the easiest route. Like you think, oh, it's a cut field, I can walk right through it. But it's not the best route because you're most likely going to bump those deer. So you always have to keep in mind where you think the deer are while you're getting into your spot, so you don't give yourself away before the hunt even begins. So you have to think about the wind direction, you have to think about the thermals, and you also just have to think about physically avoiding that area so you can get in stealthily. If you are deer hunting and you go out and there's a bad wind, as in your scent is going to be blown to where the deer are, you can almost write that spot off. Like you're likely not going to see any deer. So it's a good idea to have a couple different spots in mind and then choose the spot that is most advantageous with the prevailing wind. And you can find the prevailing wind by using onX. You can find the prevailing wind by kind of looking at the topography and thinking about thermals and the weather. You can go out and just test it multiple times. You can also just go out and, if there's a bad wind that morning, just move on to your next spot. In the morning, when you're sneaking in, it's really helpful to have a headlamp. I always sneak in with a headlamp. You might use it with a bright light. You might use it with a red light, just depending on the situation. But that's helpful, and it's going to be helpful at the end of the day as well. So at this point in the hunt, there is going to be some waiting involved. And if you're ambush hunting, I encourage you to get everything together so you don't have to mess with your stuff right before first light. And if it's cold out, you're going to need some warm clothing because you're going to be sitting there trying to be still for a long time. And once you stop moving after hiking in, you can get cold really easily. So you're just going to have to wait. And you're going to wait until first light. And then after first light, it's legal to shoot the animals that you see. And whether you're ambush hunting and sitting in one place or spot and stalking, you're going to have some waiting involved before you see an animal. Now, the question is, how long do you wait? I mean, if you're sitting in a tree stand or you're sitting on the ground waiting for a deer to walk through, how long do you wait? And really the answer is it depends, of course. But what are the factors? Well, one is, what type of movement are you expecting? If you're set up in a way to kill deer coming off of a food source and going to bedding, and it is 11 a.m. and you haven't seen any deer, well, likely the deer have already bedded down somewhere. And so it doesn't really make sense to wait where you're at for the deer to come because likely they're not coming, right? On the other hand, though, maybe you are set up on some sort of pinch point. Maybe you're set up on the corner of 2 blocks of timber that touch, and that's a travel route for deer trying to get anywhere. Or maybe you're set up in sort of a valley or overlooking a ridge where animals will travel. And if an animal is moving around, maybe it's the rut. If an animal is moving around, it's likely to come through that pinch point or that travel route. Well, then maybe you want to wait longer because there's just a chance that if an animal's on its feet, it's going to use that travel route. For me, when I'm sitting and waiting in ambush, I am usually going to give it about 3 or 4 hours because really it's hard to focus for longer than 3 or 4 hours. And if I don't have any action in that time frame, I may be interested in finding somewhere else that's better. Or maybe I'm sitting in an area that's perfect for a morning hunt, but it's not ideal for an evening hunt. So, like we talked about earlier, if I sit there and the animals have already bedded or they've gone somewhere else, it's not going to be productive. And so that brings me to the midday. So you've gone out, you got up super early, you waited till first light, you waited for 3 or 4 hours, and now it's approaching noon. What do? Well, many hunters call it quits and go to breakfast or lunch around this time. And that's fine. I mean, if I had to choose a time of day to hunt and kill deer, I'm going to choose either the early morning or the late evenings. I prefer the evenings. I find hunting in the evening is really enjoyable because I know there's an end to it, and it feels that every minute I get closer to the light fading completely, like my chances are going up. It's kind of a mental thing. I also see a lot of animals in the evening, so it's a lot of fun. But all that being said, especially for whitetail deer, often those animals are going to be bedded down in the midday, and it's going to be hard to find them. So if you have to choose a time to hunt, it's just going to be more bang for your buck early or late in the day. That being said, you obviously can't kill deer if you're not in the woods. You can't kill animals from the couch, right? So it kind of depends on what you've got going on and how much time you can allot to this. If you've got the whole day to hunt and maybe you don't have many other days to hunt, maybe you should just stay out there all day. That doesn't mean you have to stay in one place, but maybe you stay out there all day and bring a lunch with you. Or maybe it's really more about hanging out with your friends and you went out for the morning, you know you'll get more chances to hunt, but you're enjoying time with your family or friends or people in your community, and it's important to go have a meal together. I mean, you can do whatever you want. It's your hunt, right? But those are just different options that you have in the middle of the day. Sometimes if I have an unproductive morning hunt, I will use the middle of the day to go scout some areas because I know the animals are bedded. I'm not likely to find a good opportunity to kill a whitetail on its feet. And there are places that I want to go check out and see if there's deer sign and maybe think about ways that I could hunt different areas. So it may be a good time for scouting. Now, if it's in the middle of the whitetail rut, you actually do have a decent chance of killing a deer in the middle of the day because those bucks are just wild and they're all hopped up on testosterone and looking for mates, and they're going to be running around, and there's a good chance that they'll run around during the middle of the day. So if it's during the rut, you may want to hunt that whole day. If it's some other time frame, it may not be as important. And then the last thing is it may be a good time to change your location. So we talked about having a good area to hunt in the morning, and let me give you an example of how it might be different in the morning and the evenings. So in the morning, the animals are going to be moving from their food source to their daytime bedding areas. And so to catch them on their feet in that early morning, you might set up a little bit closer to their bedding area so that they start moving right before first light, and then you can catch them on their feet in the woods or closer to the thicker stuff before they actually bed down. If you were right on the field edge, there's a chance that you're going to bump them in the dark. There's also a chance that they're going to leave the field before it gets light. And so just looking over the field edge isn't going to be helpful, right? Kind of depends on pressure and time of year and all these different factors, but this is just an example. Now, think about the evenings. Deer are generally going to be moving from their daytime bedding to a food source. And so you might want to then set up on the very edge of the field in a place that has an advantageous wind. And so the deer are likely to get up on their feet and head to the field, and they may start appearing in that field in the last 30 minutes of daylight. So if you want to ensure that you get a shot at them, you actually want to intercept them a little bit sooner than the field. Hunting a field edge can certainly be effective, but let's say you're hunting a big, cagey old buck who is really smart and only comes out in like the last 5 minutes of daylight, if that. You may want to set up a little bit closer to their bedding so you can intercept them on the way to the field. So those are two very different areas, right? And the wind may change throughout the day. The thermals are going to change. And so the place where you set up may be different in the morning and in the evening. So if you're going to move at any time, it makes sense to move around the middle of the day. All right, so you've made it to the afternoon, and maybe you've seen animals, maybe you haven't. Likely you've changed position if you're ambush hunting, and even if you're spot and stalk hunting, it's likely that you've changed position because you feel like you looked at the last place very well, or you're looking for a different type of movement in the evening and thus a different area. So you've likely changed position, and now you're settling in for the last 4 hours or so of daylight. Now, if you are going to commit to one place, whether ambush hunting or spot and stalk hunting, do be careful with this that you don't go out too early. And it's not that you can't go out and sit in the same place for 6 hours. It's just that it's going to be very, very challenging to stay focused. And then once you get to that critical time frame of the last hour of daylight, you might want to move, or you just may not have your head in the game anymore. I experienced this going out and looking for bears on those long spring days where I would go out in the afternoon and I would get to my area where I wanted to glass, maybe around 3. And then it would be 6 hours until the sun went down. And by the time I got to 8 or 8:30, which is when I would be most likely to see bear activity, I was sunburned or uncomfortable or felt like I hadn't seen anything. So it was an unlikely area, whatever. So just keep that in mind. You may want to actually limit your time frame when you're going out for an evening hunt. And then when you do go out and hunt in the evenings, make sure to stay until dark. Keep hunting until you can't see, because animals are going to be moving. I have killed animals in the last 30 minutes of legal shooting light. And I've said this on the podcast before, but even if you don't have an opportunity to kill the animal, at least you will have put eyes on it and you know it exists. And that can be a huge benefit and a huge mental boost. And it will give you ideas of how to hunt it in the future. So I always say stay out until last light and just bring a headlamp so you can walk out with the light of your headlamp safely. So that could be the end of your hunt. Maybe you got up early, you stayed out late, you didn't see anything, or you didn't have an opportunity, and that's your whole hunt. And that's pretty common, to be honest, especially if you're starting out, or even if you're not starting out. If you're like me, you're going to go out a lot and not have opportunities, and that's just how hunting goes. And as you get more experienced and start to learn the areas that you're hunting better and the animals, you'll get more and more opportunities. But even people who are successful are going to have plenty of days without seeing animals, and that's just hunting. Sometimes this can be challenging because you go out to hunt and you feel like you're just burning time, especially when you don't see animals. So say you found a good area that you think white-tailed deer are going to travel through, and so you go up and set up in that area, and you're going to sit for 3 or 4 hours. Well, it can be really challenging to stay focused and to be quiet and to even commit to one area for that long, because you might get 45 minutes into your sit, see nothing, and then you're going to think, oh, I should just go somewhere else and find them. But sometimes the most effective way to kill whitetails is to sit and wait for them. Or the most effective way when you're glassing, I mean, this could really go for all sorts of animals, is to sit and be patient and wait. And it's just going to take some time. And if you spend 4 hours sitting and waiting in a spot and you don't have an opportunity, it may feel like a waste of time in some ways, but you kind of have to think about it in a different way. You have to think, I'm doing the thing that is most likely to allow me a shot opportunity if an animal comes through. And if I spend the time here, it may take a while for an animal to come through. And then if they don't come through, I will cross that off my list, or I'll come back at a different time and use that as a data point. And it's not wasted time. It's just learning and training. And sometimes it's the amount of time that it takes. I was thinking about this a little bit earlier today, and it made me think of starting a new job. And it's kind of interesting because when you start hunting, you are likely going to go out for a day here and there, or maybe a half day, or maybe you go out for a whole week. But we really don't spend a lot of time learning or training to hunt. Whereas if you start a new job, you're immediately going to be in it for like 2 weeks to 3 months to a year, just depending on what the job is, right? And you're going to be trained, and it may feel very challenging and take a while for it to click. And we don't even have that time frame. We don't have that amount of time to learn to hunt. So that 4 hours, it may feel like a waste of time in the moment, but just think of it as training. It's paying your dues. Obviously, don't spend 4 hours in a spot you don't believe in, but if you believe in it, there's animal sign, maybe you've seen animals there. It may just be the time that it takes. All right, let's back up a little bit and say that your hunt is successful. And we'll just say, for example, that you shot your deer in the early evening. So you were sitting and waiting, a deer showed up, you had, 20 seconds to make a decision and execute a shot, and you were able to put a bullet in the vitals of that animal. Way to go. That's the moment we are all looking for. Now, most likely, after you shoot a deer, it is going to run off. And it may run off a long ways, it may run off a little ways, but most likely it is not just going to fall dead right there. And this isn't because you made a bad shot. It's just the natural prey response of a deer. They are going to run as far and as fast as they can until they lose too much blood or they start to run out of oxygen, and then they're going to fall down and eventually die from their wound. But this habit of deer of running off after you've shot them means that you're going to have to recover the animal. And they may run off into some woods, they may run off across a field, who knows? But you are likely going to have to think about where you shot them and then where they went. And so we're actually going to get into this a little bit more in the next podcast about what happens after you shoot an animal. But I will give you an overview here to complete our day in the life. So you've shot the animal. The first thing you want to do is mark where the animal was when you shot it. And really, you should be thinking about this when you're looking at the animal getting ready to take the shot, because you need to know where to go to start looking for a trail to track the animal. So you mark the area, and it's a good idea to take a picture or to take your spotting scope or something and set it looking at that area. Or if you're pretty close, you can just walk out to that area and mark it with some tissue or mark it on Onyx, but just have a very solid idea of where the deer was standing when you took the shot. Then you also want to mark and think about the direction that the deer ran. And having these two data points is going to help you actually recover the animal. So once you've taken your shot, it's a good idea, and I say this from experience of not doing it before, it's a good idea to take a minute to calm down, to get your wits about you, and think before you head out to where you shot the animal. And also taking a minute, and when I say a minute, I mean 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe it's going to be longer if you're archery hunting, but you can calm down, and then also you're giving some time for the animal to die. And this is a good practice because if you go up to the animal and it's still bleeding out, but it still has some life left in it, it may get up and run further away. But if you let it just go bed down and die peacefully, likely it's not going to go super far, assuming you made a good hit. So taking a little bit of time helps you calm down and then make good decisions following. And then it also gives time for the animal to die peacefully and make sure that it doesn't go a lot further than you want it to. So once you've calmed down and you know the area where it was and where it was going, then you can grab all your stuff and go out to the place where it was standing when you shot it. And you are going to start looking for blood. Blood is going to be your best indicator that you made a good hit on the animal, and it's going to be the easiest way to track it in most cases. So you're going to start looking for blood. If you know the direction that the animal went in, you can start walking slowly that direction, trying to pick up a blood trail, and then you're going to be able to track the animal, hopefully all the way to where it is. Sometimes it's kind of obvious. You're like, I know I heard it run over there and then it fell, and I'm pretty sure it's right over there, 30 yards. And you can just go and look for it. Other times it's not going to be so obvious, or maybe it's in the evening and night has fallen and it's in thick brush and it really could be anywhere. Well, then it's going to be very important that you find the blood trail. So then you can track it with a very bright light. And if you made a good hit and the animal's bleeding enough, it should bring you right to the animal. And so in most cases, when you're hunting, there is going to be a period of time between shooting the animal and recovering the animal. And it's a big part of hunting. Again, we're going to go into it a little bit more in depth next week, along with some of these other steps. After you've recovered the animal, you are going to field dress it, you are going to extract it, and then you're going to take care of the meat. So field dressing usually means removing the guts from the animal and then starting to break it down. You are trying to do whatever you need to do to make sure that the meat doesn't spoil. So sometimes this is just going to be removing the hot entrails and opening the animal up. Other times it's going to be breaking the animal down into quarters and then hanging those quarters in a tree so they can get some airflow. It depends on the temperatures outside, the size of the animal, what you're planning to do with it, all of that. And then once you have field dressed the animal, you can either hike it out with a backpack. And if it's a whitetail deer, you may be able to fit all the quarters in a backpacking backpack. It may be a big deer, and so you have to do multiple trips, or you might leave the hide on and drag the deer out. That's also an option. It's hard to do with a big deer over a long distance, but maybe you're only 500 yards from the truck and it's pretty flat and you've got the time. So there's different ways to do that. I've actually done a podcast on it. If you want to go check it out, it was one of the earlier podcasts on how to get a deer out of the woods. And then finally, you're going to have to take care of the meat. I've also done a podcast on this. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but go check for that one. I think it's how to keep meat cool in the field. And keeping the meat cool and preventing it from spoiling is your next task. You may need a cooler. If it's cold outside, if it's like refrigeration temperatures, you're not going to have to worry about it as much. You just have to keep the meat clean and dry. Now, going all the way back to the beginning when I talked about having a plan, it's really a good idea to know what you are going to do with the meat before you've killed the animal. So, are you going to bring the meat to a processor, or are you going to bring it home and keep it cool and process it yourself? It's up to you. There's no right or wrong answer here. I like processing animals myself because I think it's fun and it gives me a lot of control over the end product. But maybe you don't have the time, or that doesn't sound enjoyable to you, or whatever it is. You can also bring the animal to a processor. Either way, you need to know how to keep the animal cool in transit and how far you're going to have to travel. And in the case of a processor, what are their hours and what type of animals do they accept? Some processors want the animal to be whole, except for the entrails and with the hide on. Others will take a quartered out animal. It just depends on the processor. So having an idea before you go out to hunt which processor you're going to go to is really important if you don't plan to process the animal yourself. Once you get the animal or the meat to the processor or into some refrigeration, you're kind of home free. At this point, you've got some time. The meat's not going to spoil because it's refrigerated, and you can then take your time processing the animal and making it into something that you would want to eat. When you kill an animal, sometimes it can make for a late night. If you shoot an animal in the last 30 minutes of daylight, it's going to get dark, and you had better have a headlamp to be able to track and recover that animal. And then you're just going to be up as long as it takes to find it, field dress it, maybe break it down, get it back to your truck. And that's just the way it goes. Now, if it's a late night and it's in cold temperatures, maybe you will find the animal, field dress it, and then leave it overnight. And if it's cold enough temperatures, it's okay to do that. Or maybe you'll hang up the quarters and leave them overnight. But if it's warm temperatures, like a early September archery hunt, and it only gets down to 70 degrees at night, you kind of just have to keep working until you have that animal into some refrigeration. All right, guys. Well, that is a day in the life of a deer hunter. And I hope that was helpful for you. Maybe you will do it a little bit differently, and there's nothing wrong with that. Do what works best for you. But I just wanted to give you an overview so you can kind of understand if you're on the right track. One thing that I want to go back to just briefly is this idea of waiting. I think being impatient is the number one way not to kill animals. And this may mean waiting and sitting still in one place for a long time. It may mean waiting and glassing a hill repeatedly for a couple hours. But especially with white-tailed deer, I think of them kind of like big rabbits sometimes. They are just so flighty and aware of their surroundings. And so if you go walking and looking for them and you're just hiking, you may bump one, but there's a good chance that if you're moving around a lot, it's going to detect you before you detect it, and it's going to run away. And so sometimes you just have to buckle down and be patient and wait and be still. And even if you are still hunting, where you're walking and then stopping and then walking and stopping very slowly, you even have to be patient in that even while you're moving. A question that runs through my head sometimes when I'm hunting, it's kind of become a mantra, is, do you want to hunt or do you want to kill deer? And when I want to kill deer and I buckle down and act like someone who is going to kill a deer, I hunt differently than someone who's just out for a walk or wants to hike around and see if they bump any deer. And usually I'm much more effective. So you have to get into that brain space of, I'm doing the things I know I need to do to kill an animal. I'm not just out here to walk around in hopes of a random encounter. So I'll leave you with that. Have a great week, everybody, and I will catch you on the next one.